The Porsche 911 GTS. This is a 992 generation car, and we have already done a launch video on this vehicle where we took it for a quick drive on the mountain roads outside of Atlanta, Georgia. But with that in mind, we're going to be taking a deeper dive. We're going to really focus on what makes the GTS different from a technical perspective versus the regular Carrera and Carrera S models. And then we're going to be taking this for a drive at Autobahn Country Club. We're going to explore what this vehicle is like to drive at its absolute limit. So with that, enjoy. Inside the 911 GTS. And to be honest, we've covered this generation 911's cabin a lot at this point. So I'm not going to bore you with every single detail. Instead, I'm going to hit you with some of my key takeaways. Now, Mark and I at this point have spent a lot of time in a variety of sports cars, and I'm very grateful for that experience. But what that has also done is made me appreciate what Porsche has done with this generation of 911's cabin even more. They have figured out how to blend the specialness of a sports car with the usability of a regular automobile. And what I mean by that is the seating position is nice and low. All of the controls, whether that be the pedal box, it's one of the easier cars to heel toe in the world, where the shifter is placed where the steering wheel is, it's all very easy to use and in the right position. You have good visibility in this car because the dash is nice and low in this 911 and there's a lot of glass. The car instills you with a sense of confidence. You can really see what's out in front of you and what's around you, which makes you feel more comfortable when you drive the vehicle. And this is something that not a lot of other manufacturers do a good job at. An F-Type, an AMG GT, an R8, or Huracan. All of those cars feel like a deep, dark hole. The 911 isn't that way. You have good headroom in this car. And because of the rear engine layout, you have back seats. While I admit the back seats are basically only useful for small children or people you don't like, you can use it as a storage space, making this a truly practical car. Lastly, the instrumentation in this car too feels and looks expensive and is great to use. The center tack, which is basically this three-dimensional design, looks like a piece of jewelry, and your digital displays offer a lot of information. I will say, depending on your driving position, the far most gauges on the left and right are obscured by the steering wheel. So what makes this a GTS from an interior and exterior perspective? On the exterior, you get some GTS badges, you get the sportier optional fascias on the 911 standard, and some center lock wheels with some giant brakes behind them. On the interior space, it comes to packaging. You get some more options as standard. You get the optional GTS pack, which covers everything in Alcantara and GTS badges. But more importantly, they changed two functional things. First off, you can get this car as either a PDK or a manual. The PDK is unchanged, but the manual car gets a slightly shorter gear knob for shorter feeling shifts, though the linkage, which is a cable unit, is the same. And then there's the lightweight package. The lightweight package deletes the rear seats, gets rid of some of the sound deadening, and turns this more into a more focused weekend track car. I wouldn't recommend it in a daily driven car. On that note as well, they also let you option the carbon buckets, which is something you can't do in the standard Carrera or Carrera S. The carbon buckets are a mixed bag depending on who you are. I find them very comfortable, but I will admit they are a pain to get in and out of. But with that, it's time for us to put this thing up on the lift in the shop and walk you through all the technical details. Mark, we're underneath yet another 911. This is a 992 Carrera GTS C2, or a rear-wheel drive variant.
First off, before we get started with all the technical details that people are just going to glaze over anyway, who is this for? Because there's a lot of trim levels and different ways you can option this out.
Well, this is for someone who has $154,000. This is one of the more extreme variants of the Carrera you can get. You don't want something as fast as a Turbo or Turbo S. You want rear-wheel drive, but you want a lot of the performance bits baked in from those more expensive cars in a regular Carrera.
Okay. So this would kind of be like an in-between of a GT3 and a
regular
Turbo
911.
S or Turbo?
Yeah, it's somewhere in between there. Jacob and Yuri joke that it's a sweet spot. It's not that. This is for someone who wants to drive, particularly this variant. So the GTS comes in three different body styles. You can get it as a coupe, convertible, or Targa. The Targa gets softer suspension. It's regular PASM suspension. However, the coupe and convertible can get PASM Sport, which is the stiffest spring rates you can get on a 911 that's strut front. This is tied with the spring rates found on the Turbo S with PASM Sport suspension. It's nearly double what you'd get in a regular 911 or Carrera.
So they've injected testosterone into this thing for the upping the spring rates, the damper rates, to make this more of the performance, like driver's car version of
If
this.
you can't get a GT3 or you don't want to drive a GT3 every single day, this is sort of the car for you. This is on MMB, which is the 992 911 platform, which means it's strut front, multi-link rear. Everything's aluminum like you're used to, and you can option a bunch of different things of this car. Obviously, the sport suspension comes standard. You can put in the softer suspension if you want. You can have PDCC, which is the active sway bars. The car we drove in Atlanta had those.
Okay.
You can option in rear steer, and you can go to bigger brakes. So this car, as standard, has steels. These steels on the GTS are bigger than the steels found on the Carrera S. They are the steels off the 911 Turbo. You can option carbon ceramics though. These cars come standard with center lock wheels.
The GTS?
The GTS. All GTSs come with center lock wheels right off the 911 Turbo S, but you can option more traditional wheels if you don't want to deal with the pain of a center lock.
But the brakes on this come from the 911 Turbo?
Turbo, yes.
Gotcha.
The motor in this car is the same 9A2 Evo that you're used to. It's the 3-liter. It's mechanically identical to the one found in the Carrera S. However, they have upped the boost. So when they designed this car, allegedly this was the boost level they had in mind, and then they detuned the subsequent models. I think it runs like 18 or 19 PSI. So it's good for like 30 more horsepower and 15 foot-pounds more torque. You're not really buying this for that, the extra power. You're buying for the fact that it has all of this stuff baked into a single package.
And I mean, and it's effective. The one we drove in Atlanta was incredible, and I even questioned the fact that it felt faster than a GT3. And
Particularly an older strut-based GT3.
yeah, for sure. So I'll be curious, Jack, when we go rip this thing out on Autobahn, how it drives.
All right, let's do it, Mark.
God, I feel so. I feel so blessed to be out here with Master Driver John Business. Why don't you close me on telling me why I need to buy this car?
Well, first thing, Mark, is listen to this engine. You know what that's the sound of?
What?
No fake engine noise.
Oh. Why wouldn't they add fake engine noise? It just sounds so good.
And that's one of the things I enjoy about this car is even after all these years, all these variants of 911s, it's still a 911, which means it's very good to drive.
I think one thing that surprises me about this car, and I know we've already driven it, but out here on the street, you're like, yeah, it's fast. But out here, holy shit, is this thing fast. I mean, we just, I mean, it absorbs bumps too. I mean, for it being such a great street car, this thing is probably very similar to the GT3 in terms of like lap times or speed. I mean, obviously there's no emotional
Not the 992, but the 991
yeah,
does
right,
too.
right, yeah. I mean, it's crazy, man. Every Porsche that's high performance we get into, man.
Yeah, the rear steer, look, this car doesn't have the track alignment. It doesn't have crazy camber in the front end or the world's stickiest tires. This is a really good job getting into corners for a strut car.
You would never know it. I mean, the fact that you're able to pull the speed that you are without all those things set up properly is just, you know, putting real tires on a track alignment, this thing would be even like maybe 5 to 10% faster than it is now, and it's already batshit crazy.
Yeah, sure, you can't lean on the front end like you can in the 992 GT3, but
yeah, the front end doesn't work as well as the new 992 GT3s, for sure.
So here's my question for you, Mark, as we're slowing down. What are your overall feelings on like the, let's call them non-GT3 911s?
I don't know, it's hard for me because you're getting into a price tag that is just so sky high, and I'm not saying that the performance isn't here, but again, like the GT3 has all of this and the emotion plus a front end that works pretty much all the time. This car, if you overwork the front end of this car, if you run the tires off in the front, the car dynamically changes quickly from pretty neutral to more understeer in the front, so you have to balance it more than you have to with the GT3, and I think from the driver's car part of me, that's why I like the GT3. This car, it just feels fast all the time, and it's very progressive on how things change, It's very, very hard to complain about this even as a street car because it's crazy fast. But what's your experience on the street?
So as a street car, as we've slowed down and we're paying attention to what our actual thoughts are, this is the hardest core strut 911 you can get that's currently sold, right? It's got the stiffest suspension, and in some ways it suffers as a street car, right? It is a busy ride on bad pavement at lower speeds. At high speeds, you don't really notice the stiff suspension. Porsche does an excellent job dampening all of that out. The gearbox, you and I drove this car in Georgia during the launch program. The 8-speed PDK and the 7-speed manual aren't quite as good as their GT car counterparts. But that said, I'm still really glad to be driving a manual gearbox in a high-performance car.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about flying down a straightaway, getting in the braking zone, and heel-toeing a downshift, or leaning on the rev match function. It's still fun to do. You're still operating a gearbox, which that's going away in modern cars. And as we've recently driven things like the C8 Z06, regular C8, and a lot of other performance cars, like I said in the interior segment of this video, what I really appreciate about Porsche cars is they have basically dialed everything into a point where you don't think about anything in a negative way. Nothing stands out to you where you're like, oh, I wish they did something different.
Yeah, that's 100% right, Jack. I mean, that's where I would leave it personally.
So with that then, Mark, let's head into the final thoughts, sir.
All right.
Final thoughts on the 911 GTS, and I wanted to say this first. Huge thanks to our Porsche reps and Autobahn Country Club for having us. If you're looking to do a track day in the Midwest, track day rental, or you're looking to become a member, please hit them up. So what about the car itself? Well, if you're a longtime viewer of this channel, you're probably not going to be surprised to hear me say it's a very good car. Really, the only complaint you could really have is its price. Yes, Porsche is not a value brand by any means, but at over $150,000, this is a very expensive car, particularly when you compare it to things like the all-new C8 Z06, you're looking at R8 prices, AMG GTs. This is a very expensive car. That said, when you spend a lot of time with this vehicle, whether on the track, on the road, or if you just sit in it parked, you realize it's expensive for a reason. It is an excellent car. Porsche has been building 911s for so damn long that they've really worked out all of the negative kinks or quirks. There is nothing wrong with this car, and in some ways it makes it frustrating. It's so good. On the track, it is unbelievably fast. It's about as fast as the prior generation GT3, the 991.2 cars, and it just does everything well. So how does this compare to something like a Carrera S, which costs less money? Well, in the horsepower department, I'm going to be honest, you don't really notice the extra power. And that's because the regular Carrera S is so fast. What you will notice are the suspension tuning differences. With the stiffer dampers and bars set up, this car does ride a lot stiffer at lower speeds. At the highway, however, you don't really notice it. But on the track, it does make a very, very big difference. This car has noticeably better body control. And with the optional rear steer, this car really gets in and out of corners very, very well. The other thing is the brakes. We didn't really talk about it on the track drive, but these steel brakes that are standard and larger than the Carrera S's brakes are excellent. They are really a standout in this car, and obviously if you want to go more extreme, you can option this out with the carbon ceramics. But with that, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.